The blood in the seams, the tragedy of Rana Plaza. Prologue, the true cost of fashion. In the brightly lit, air-conditioned shopping malls of the West, fashion is fast, disposable, and cheap. A brightly colored summer dress or a basic cotton t-shirt can be bought for the price of a cup of coffee. But clothing does not simply materialize on store shelves. Behind every perfectly stitched hem and every neatly printed label lies a sprawling, complex, and often brutal global supply chain. At the very bottom of this chain is Bangladesh. In 2013, the country was the world's second largest exporter of garments, fueled by an army of millions of workers, mostly young women from impoverished rural villages. They worked grueling hours in cramped, sweltering conditions to produce the clothing that the rest of the world wore. In Savar, a bustling, chaotic industrial suburb of the capital city Dhaka, stood a building that perfectly encapsulated the dark side of this economic miracle. It was an 8-story concrete monolith known as Rana Plaza. Inside its walls were a bank, several shops, and 5 separate garment factories employing over 5,000 people. It was a hive of relentless industry. But beneath the noise of thousands of sewing machines, Rana Plaza was hiding a fatal secret. It was a monument to corruption, built on a swamp and held together by nothing but greed. Chapter I, a foundation of mud and lies. The story of Rana Plaza's doom began years before the first brick was laid. The building was owned by Sohel Rana, a local politician and businessman known for his ruthless tactics and deep connections to the ruling political party. Rana considered himself untouchable, a man for whom the laws of the city and the laws of physics simply did not apply. When Rana acquired the land for his plaza, it was not solid ground. It was a filled-in pond, a patch of swampy earth that was fundamentally unsuitable for supporting a massive, multi-story structure. Furthermore, the original permit granted for Rana Plaza was strictly for a 5-story commercial building meant to house ground floor shops and light office spaces. It was never designed, legally or structurally, to be an industrial factory. But Sohel Rana was not satisfied with the rent from a few local shops. The real money in Bangladesh was in the garment industry. Ignoring building codes, zoning laws, and basic engineering principles, Rana illegally added 3 upper floors to the structure, turning his 5-story commercial block into an 8-story industrial behemoth. This illegal expansion sealed the building's fate. A structure designed to hold the weight of office desks and foot traffic was suddenly burdened with the immense, crushing weight of thousands of heavy industrial sewing machines. But the true danger was not just the static weight, it was the movement. Garment factories require massive, heavy-duty diesel generators to keep the machines running during Dhaka's frequent power outages. These multi-ton generators were installed on the upper floors and the roof. When they turned on, along with thousands of sewing machines operating in unison, they sent severe rhythmic vibrations down through the entire structure. The building was shaking itself to pieces from the inside out. Chapter 2, Tuesday, April 23rd, the warning sign. For years, the workers of Rana Plaza felt the building tremble. They noticed the doors that wouldn't close properly and the plaster that occasionally rained down from the ceilings. But in the desperate fight for survival, one does not question the safety of the workplace. One simply puts their head down and sews. However, on the morning of Tuesday, April 23, 2013, the building could no longer hide its agony. Shortly after the workday began, a loud, terrifying noise echoed through the lower floors. It sounded like an explosion. Workers screamed and rushed for the stairwells in a panic. When the dust settled, the source of the noise was discovered on the 3rd floor. A massive, jagged crack had ripped through the concrete floor and traveled up several of the main weight-bearing pillars. The structural integrity of the building had snapped. The internal stress from the illegal upper floors, the heavy machinery, and the swampy foundation had finally overcome the concrete. The local police were called. An engineer named Abdur Razak Khan was brought in by the building's owner to inspect the damage. Khan took one look at the deep, structural fissures splitting the main support columns and was horrified. He immediately told the media and the local authorities that the building was in critical condition. It was unsafe for anyone to be inside. The police cordoned off the building. The shops and the bank on the lower floors immediately packed up their cash and documents, locked their doors, and sent their employees home. They announced they would not return until the building was certified safe by independent experts. But on the upper floors, where the garment factories were located, a different set of rules applied. Chapter 3, the economics of desperation. To understand what happened the next morning, one must understand the brutal economics of the fast fashion industry. The factory owners renting space in Rana Plaza were under immense pressure from Western clothing brands. These brands demanded incredibly fast turnaround times. If a factory missed a shipping deadline, the Western buyer could cancel the order entirely or demand a massive discount. To the factory owners, a missed deadline meant financial ruin. In their eyes, the cracked pillars were a nuisance, but a delayed shipment was a catastrophe. That evening, Sohel Rana stood in front of the local news cameras. With arrogant confidence, he declared that the cracks were nothing serious, just some superficial plaster damage. He publicly guaranteed the building was safe and ordered the factory owners to resume operations the next day. For the thousands of garment workers returning to their slums that night, a terrible choice loomed. They had seen the cracks. They had felt the building shake. They knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that Rana Plaza was a death trap. But these workers, mostly women earning less than $40 a month, lived on the razor's edge of extreme poverty. They had no savings. They had children to feed, rent to pay, and families in rural villages depending on their remittances. In the garment industry, if you did not work, you did not eat. Chapter 4, Wednesday, April 24, the ultimatum. The morning of Wednesday, April 24, 2013, was warm and humid. By 8:30 a.m., thousands of workers had gathered in the dusty plaza outside the building. They stood there, looking up at the towering concrete structure, paralyzed by fear. The police cordon from the day before was gone. The shops on the ground floor were shuttered tight, and the bank employees had stayed home. But the managers of the 5 garment factories were standing by the main entrances, demanding the workers go inside. A tense standoff began. The women refused to cross the threshold. They pointed to the visible cracks in the walls. They pleaded with the managers, crying that they did not want to die. Some workers attempted to turn around and go home, preferring to lose a day's wages rather than risk their lives. It was then that the managers deployed their ultimate weapon, intimidation and economic terror. Men with wooden sticks, allegedly thugs hired by Sohel Rana, materialized in the crowd, physically blocking workers from leaving the area. The factory managers pulled out megaphones. They announced that anyone who did not enter the building and sit at their sewing machine immediately would be fired on the spot. Worse still, they threatened to withhold the previous month's pay. For a Bangladeshi garment worker, losing a month's wages is not an inconvenience. It is a death sentence by starvation. It means eviction. It means your children go hungry. The workers were trapped between two certainties: the immediate terror of a crumbling building and the slow, agonizing terror of extreme poverty. Tears streaming down their faces, holding on to each other for support, the young women finally broke. Beaten down by threats and the crushing weight of their economic reality, they surrendered. One by one, they walked past the angry managers, past the men with sticks, and stepped into the dark stairwells of Rana Plaza. They climbed up to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th floors. They sat down at their heavy sewing machines. They turned the power on. They were forced into their own tomb so that the Western world could have its cheap clothing on time. Chapter V, 8:57 a.m., the fatal resonance. By 8:45 a.m., the factories were humming. Over 3,100 people were inside the building. The air was thick with fabric dust and the deafening clatter of sewing machines. The workers tried to focus on the fabric in front of them, desperately trying to ignore the deep, agonizing groans echoing from the concrete pillars around them. Then, the power went out. Power outages are a daily occurrence in Dhaka. In a normal building, it would mean a few moments of darkness. But in Rana Plaza, it was the trigger for the apocalypse. The moment the city grid failed, the massive, multi-ton diesel generators located on the upper floors and the roof automatically roared to life. When these massive engines kicked in, they sent violent, heavy vibrations violently downward through a building that was already fundamentally broken. This created a phenomenon known in physics as resonance. The rhythmic shaking of the generators perfectly matched the weakened structure's frequency. At 8:57 a.m., the fatally wounded pillars on the lower floors simply disintegrated. Survivors later described a sound like a bomb detonating, followed by a sensation of absolute weightlessness. The floor simply vanished from beneath their feet. Because the building was made of concrete slabs supported by inadequate pillars, it suffered a catastrophic pancake collapse. The 8-story building did not fall sideways, it pancaked straight down. The roof crashed into the 8th floor, which crashed into the 7th, driving all the weight downward in a matter of seconds. Inside, the scene was hellish. Thousands of women, heavy machinery, concrete slabs, and massive rolls of brightly colored fabric were violently thrown together, crushed into a dense, suffocating sandwich of death. In less than 90 seconds, the towering 8-story Rana Plaza was reduced to a smoking 3-story pile of twisted rebar, shattered concrete, and crushed human bodies. Chapter VI's The Nightmare in the Rubble. The immediate aftermath was a scene of unimaginable horror and chaos. A massive cloud of gray dust hung over Savar. The wails of thousands of trapped people echoed from the depths of the rubble. The local fire brigade arrived quickly, but they were completely unequipped for a disaster of this magnitude. They had no heavy lifting gear, no concrete cutters, and no seismic listening devices. The initial rescue was carried out by ordinary citizens, local shopkeepers, university students, and garment workers from nearby factories who ran to the scene with nothing but their bare hands, hammers, and bolt cutters. They crawled into tiny, pitch-black voids between the pancaked concrete slabs. The smell of leaking diesel fuel, blood, and decaying bodies quickly became overpowering. The stories that emerged from the rubble were both heroic and horrifying. Rescuers found workers pinned beneath massive concrete beams, begging for water. In several instances, when heavy machinery could not be brought in, doctors had to crawl into the tight, claustrophobic spaces and perform field amputations, using butcher knives and hacksaws without anesthesia, just to pull survivors free from beneath the crushing weight. For 17 agonizing days, the search and rescue operation continued. The world watched in horror as the death toll climbed relentlessly, day after day. In the rubble, rescuers found the tragic irony of the global supply chain. The severed arms and crushed bodies of the workers were tangled in thousands of brightly colored, perfectly pristine shirts bearing the labels of some of the most famous clothing brands in North America and Europe. When the final piece of rubble was cleared, the staggering human cost was tallied. 1,004 people were dead, more than 2,500 were rescued alive, though hundreds were left with severe permanent disabilities, amputations, and profound psychological trauma. Epilogue: The Legacy of Rana Plaza. The collapse of Rana Plaza remains the deadliest accidental structural failure in modern human history and the worst industrial disaster in the history of the garment sector. The tragedy sparked a massive global outcry. Western consumers were suddenly forced to confront the blood stitched into their cheap garments. Under immense public pressure, hundreds of global apparel brands signed the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, a legally binding agreement to fund independent safety inspections and repairs in thousands of factories. Sohel Rana, who had attempted to flee to India in the days following the collapse, was captured by a commando team. He and dozens of factory owners and corrupt government officials were charged with murder. Yet, for the survivors, the justice has been slow and the compensation has been meager. Many of the women pulled from the rubble can never work again. They live with phantom pains from amputated limbs and the haunting memories of the dark, suffocating hours spent pinned beneath the concrete. The story of Rana Plaza is not merely a story of bad engineering or a swampy foundation. It is a story of a global economic system that prioritized cheap clothing over human life. It is the story of a Tuesday when the walls cracked, and a Wednesday when thousands of terrified women were forced to walk into a building they knew was going to fall simply because they could not afford to starve. Today, every time we look at a price tag that seems too good to be true, the ghosts of Rana Plaza remind us someone, somewhere, always pays the difference.